There's a myth in every entrepreneur's mind that more is better. More rules, more theory, more how-tos. Today, I'm here to debunk that myth, because the truth is this. I've been bruised on the battlefield of business. I've watched legions chase complexity and fail. You only need to know 7 rules, 7, the right 7, and by the end of this minute, you'll see they're enough. When you've been in the game long enough, you stop talking like a theorist and you start speaking like someone who has seen the battlefield up close. Not the kind of battlefield they write about in textbooks. No, I'm talking about boardrooms where every word shifts the balance of millions. I'm talking about 3 a.m. calls because a deal in Singapore just went sideways. I'm talking about making payroll when the bank balance is a joke and the punchline is on you. See, authority isn't built in the classroom. It's built in the furnace. It's built when your idea, your conviction, your very reputation is on the line. You don't get it by reading 1,000 articles. You earn it the hard way through wins that make headlines and losses that keep you up at night. There was a time when I walked into rooms and I had to prove that I belonged there. I didn't have the titles, the fancy credentials, or the network that could open doors. But what I had was resolve. Every meeting, every pitch, every contract negotiation. I was stacking scars, each one teaching me something you can't Google. You learn how people really behave when the pressure is high, when the numbers are red, when the market turns against you. You learn that most leaders are comfortable when the sun is shining, but only a few can dance in the rain. And when you've been through enough storms, you develop a different posture. It's not arrogance, it's certainty. You stop flinching when the wind changes direction because you've already been in hurricanes. You stop doubting yourself when a competitor moves faster because you've seen speed without strategy destroy empires. You stop reacting to noise because you fought for signal in the middle of chaos. That's why people who have real battle scars speak differently. They don't get caught up in jargon. They don't need to inflate their sentences to sound impressive. They've seen too much to waste time pretending. They'll tell you the truth, sometimes so directly it feels like a slap. But that slap is worth more than the 1,000 polite lies you've been told before. I remember sitting across from a potential partner who had all the charm in the world. Smooth pitch, flawless deck, vision so grand you could almost smell the champagne. I'd seen that movie before. I'd also seen how it ends. Bankruptcy, lawsuits, and the smell of burnt bridges. So I didn't just nod along. I asked the hard questions. I pressed where it hurt. Because when you've been burned, you learn to feel for the heat before you get too close. Scar tissue does something strange. It makes you harder and softer at the same time. Harder because you don't fall for the same tricks twice. Softer because you understand the weight of failure, and you respect the ones who are still trying despite it. You can look someone in the eye and know whether they've just read the script or actually lived the story. That's why real authority doesn't come from titles. It doesn't come from the corner office or the nameplate on the desk. It comes from the willingness to be in the arena when the stakes are real. It comes from making decisions that could cost you everything and living with the outcome. It comes from being wrong in public, taking the hit, and showing up again anyway. If you've never had to rebuild from scratch, you might not understand this yet. But once you have, you'll realize something important. You're not afraid anymore. Not because the risk is gone, but because you've survived enough to know you can do it again. That is the kind of certainty you can't buy, you can't fake, and you can't teach. The world is full of voices trying to sound credible. But when you've got the scars, you don't need to sound credible. You just are. People can feel it in the way you carry yourself, in the way you choose your words, in the way you're not desperate to be liked. You're not chasing applause, you're focused on results. And here's the thing, when you speak from that place, people listen differently. They lean in, not because you've dazzled them with slides or theories, but because they sense that every word you're saying has been paid for, in time, in sweat, in failure, in getting back up. That is the price of real authority. And if you're willing to pay it, the rewards are beyond anything the textbooks can promise. Charisma is not about walking into a room and demanding attention. It's about walking into a room and the air shifts because people can feel you've brought something with you. Energy, conviction, presence. The mistake most people make is thinking it's about being the loudest voice. No, Charisma is about knowing when to raise your voice, when to lower it, and when to let silence do the heavy lifting. But charisma on its own is like a good-looking car with no engine. You can turn heads, but you won't go anywhere. That's where humor comes in. Humor is the oil that keeps the engine running smoothly. It's the thing that makes your presence not just impressive, but approachable. Because if you can make people laugh, even for a second, you break down walls. You become human. And the moment you become human, you become memorable. I once spoke to an audience that was cold, arms folded, faces blank. You could almost hear them thinking, all right, impress me. I didn't go straight into the heavy material. I told them a quick story about a pitch I once messed up so badly that I walked out of the boardroom with my laptop bag, only to realize I'd left the laptop inside. The room erupted, and just like that, they were with me. Humor is a bridge, cross it, and you can take people anywhere. But humor without gravitas, that's just a stand-up routine, and you're not here to be a clown. Gravitas is the weight behind your words. It's the thing that makes people stop scrolling, stop whispering, stop thinking about lunch, and start thinking about what you're saying. Gravitas comes from two places, substance and delivery. Substance means your words have been tested by reality, not just theory. Delivery means you know how to carry those words so they land exactly where you want them to. Think of it like this. Charisma draws them in, humor opens them up, gravitas locks them in. Without all three, your message either fails to land or fails to stick. Too much charisma without substance, and you're a show. Too much gravitas without warmth, and you're a lecture. Too much humor without purpose, and you're forgettable. I've seen leaders with incredible gravitas lose their teams because they were so serious all the time that nobody wanted to approach them. I've also seen people with endless charisma get by for years on charm, but the moment they faced real scrutiny, they crumbled because there was nothing under the surface. And I've seen people so obsessed with being funny that when it came time to be serious, nobody took them seriously. The art is in the blend, and here's the truth. This blend isn't about personality type. You don't have to be born with it. You build it. Charisma comes from confidence in your competence. Humor comes from humility, being willing to laugh at yourself, not just at others. Gravitas comes from the scars of experience, from having lived through enough that you no longer need to bluff. When you speak, people aren't just listening to your words. They're watching your face, your hands, your posture. They're reading your pauses. They're deciding whether they can trust you. If you're charismatic without being authentic, they'll feel it. If you're serious without being relatable, they'll resist you. If you're funny without being intentional, they'll enjoy you but forget you. The goal is to be unforgettable. I remember being in a high-stakes meeting where the mood was tense, $1 million deal, too many egos in one room. Everyone was rigid, defensive. I cracked a light, unexpected comment that made the whole table laugh, including the most intimidating person there. In that moment, the tension broke, but I didn't waste it. I went straight into the hard conversation we needed to have. That's the dance. Humor to open the door, gravitas to walk through it. People often ask, how do you develop gravitas? You don't develop gravitas by trying to be serious all the time. You develop it by becoming deeply competent at what you do, so that when you speak, there's weight behind it. You've done the work. You've earned the right to be heard. And when you mix that with charisma and humor, you become unstoppable. Here's the secret most will never tell you. Charisma makes people want to listen to you. Humor makes them enjoy listening to you. Gravitas makes them remember and act on what you said. That's the trifecta. Without it, you're just another voice in the noise. With it, you're the one they quote, the one they follow, the one they call when it matters. And when you've mastered it, you don't have to fight for the room's attention. The room will fight to give it to you. Storytelling is not about standing up and narrating random events from your life. It's about engineering an experience that takes the listener from where they are to where you need them to be, without them realizing you've moved them. It's the art of making your point so clear, so alive, that it stops being your story and starts being their story. The problem is, most people tell stories that are too small. They talk about something that happened to them without connecting it to anything bigger. That's just self-indulgence. Good storytelling is when the room leaves thinking, that's exactly what I've been through, even though they've never met you before. It scales when it transcends the moment, the context, and even you. I once spoke at an event to a group of startup founders. I told them about the first time I tried to raise capital for an idea I believed would change everything. I was young, hungry, and, if I'm honest, naive. I thought if I presented the numbers, the market analysis, and the product demo, the investors would throw money at me. Instead, they tore me apart. They didn't just reject the pitch. They dismantled me in real time. Now, I could have told that story as a woe is me moment, but I didn't. I made it about every entrepreneur who has ever faced rejection, every person who has ever walked into a room certain they had the winning idea and walked out questioning themselves. I took them to that boardroom. I described the sound of the leather chairs creaking, the flicker of the projector, the smell of stale coffee. I made them feel it, and then I connected it to what they needed to know. That rejection is part of the process, not the end of it. That's how you make a story scale. The details pull them in, but the universal truth lifts it above your personal experience. You're not just talking about you. You're talking about them. You're not just talking about a moment. You're talking about a pattern they recognize in their own life. The trick is to know what to leave in and what to leave out. Most people drown their stories in unnecessary details that don't serve the point. You need enough texture to make it real, but not so much that the lesson gets lost. A story is a vehicle. Once it's taken them to the destination, you don't keep driving in circles. And here's something else. Great storytelling requires vulnerability. Not the fake kind where you admit to small, safe mistakes to seem relatable, but the kind where you're willing to show the cracks. People don't connect with perfection. They connect with the flaws you've overcome. The magic is in showing them that you've been where they are, that you understand the fear, the doubt, the frustration, and then showing them how you got through it. Scaling a story also means adapting it to different audiences without losing the essence. I've told that capital, raising story to startup founders, corporate executives, and even high school students. The details change, the language shifts, but the core remains the same: resilience in the face of rejection. It's like a song. You can change the arrangement, but the melody stays recognizable. One of the most powerful things about storytelling is that it bypasses logic and speaks straight to emotion. People will forget your statistics, but they'll remember how you made them feel. If you can make them see themselves in your story, you've already won. That's why leaders who master storytelling can move markets, shift company cultures, and even shape political landscapes. Facts inform, stories transform, but there's a responsibility in that power. A story can build or it can manipulate. It can inspire action or it can distort reality. When you tell a story that scales, you're planting something in people's minds that might grow for years. You owe it to them to make sure what you plant has value. When you've done it right, the audience walks away telling your story to someone else, not because you asked them to, but because it became theirs. They'll say, I heard this story about someone who... And they won't even realize they're carrying your message forward. That's the ultimate measure of scale, when your story lives on without you. And the best part, you don't need to have climbed Everest or survived some wild ordeal to tell a story that scales. You just need to find the truth in your experience that connects to the truth in theirs. Once you do that, you can take any moment, no matter how small, and turn it into something that moves an entire room, because in the end, the point of a great story isn't that they remember you, it's that they remember themselves differently because of you. Clarity is a weapon. In a world drowning in noise, the person who can cut through it with precision will always have the advantage. The tragedy is most people think they're being clear when they're just being loud. They mistake volume for impact, complexity for intelligence, and jargon for expertise. The truth is, if you can't explain it simply, you probably don't understand it deeply enough. I've sat in rooms where the stakes were enormous, hundreds of millions on the line, and listened to people talk for an hour without saying anything. Fancy words, endless slides, elaborate graphs, and yet the decision makers in the room still didn't know what problem we were solving. That's not communication, that's camouflage, and camouflage has no place in leadership. No-nonsense clarity means stripping away everything that doesn't serve the message. It's about saying what you mean, in the fewest words possible and saying it in a way that cannot be misunderstood. It's about having the courage to be direct, even when directness makes people uncomfortable. I learned this lesson the hard way. Early in my career, I thought my job was to impress. I believed that if I could show how much I knew, I would win respect. So I packed every presentation with data, theories, and sophisticated frameworks. People nodded politely, but the deals didn't close. Then one day, a mentor pulled me aside and said, "You're not here to sound smart. You're here to be understood." That changed everything. I started speaking in plain language. I started focusing on the one thing that mattered most in every meeting. What do I need this person to know, feel, or do by the time I stop talking? When you start with that question, you stop decorating your message and start delivering it. Clarity is also about decisions. If you're unclear, your team will fill in the blanks themselves, and they'll each fill them differently. That's how projects drift, priorities shift, and opportunities get lost. A leader who isn't crystal clear might as well be absent. When you communicate with no-nonsense clarity, there's no room for interpretation. People know exactly what's expected, exactly where they're going, and exactly how they'll measure progress. But clarity isn't just about words, it's about intention. You can speak clearly and still confuse people if your intention isn't sharp. Before you communicate anything, whether it's a pitch, a speech, or a one-on-one conversation, you need to be clear with yourself first. If you don't know what you're trying to achieve, every sentence you say will wander. One of the most dangerous habits in business is mistaking complexity for competence. People hide behind complicated language because it gives them an excuse when things fail. Well, you didn't understand the nuance. No, if it can't be explained simply, it's not ready to execute. Simplicity is not the enemy of sophistication, it's the proof of it. I've walked into boardrooms with 3 slides while others had 30. I've won deals in 5 minutes while others took 50. Not because I knew more, but because I could distill what mattered and discard the rest. That's the skill. It's not about having all the information. It's about knowing which piece of information will move the room. And here's the part most people miss. Clarity is a sign of respect. When you speak simply, you're saying, "I value your time, I value your attention. I want you to understand this as quickly as possible so we can act." When you bury your message in fluff, you're saying, "My ego matters more than your comprehension." People feel the difference even if they can't articulate it. Clarity also makes you unshakable under pressure. When a crisis hits, you don't have time for long explanations. You need to say, "This is the problem. This is what we're doing. Here's who's responsible. Let's move." That's it. The person who can speak with no-nonsense clarity in those moments is the one people follow. Some will resist this approach because it forces accountability. When you're clear, you can be measured. There's nowhere to hide. That's why so many avoid it. But if you want to lead, you have to embrace it. You have to be willing to put your message out there, unambiguous and unprotected, and stand by it. Because here's the truth. Clear leaders create uncertain teams, and uncertain teams lose. Clear leaders create confident teams, and confident teams win. It's as simple as that. No-nonsense clarity isn't about sounding clever. It's about creating movement. And movement is the difference between an idea that lives in your head and an outcome that changes your life. Motivation is a sugar rush. It feels good in the moment, but it fades fast. People clap, they nod, they post a quote on social media, and then they go back to doing exactly what they were doing before. That's because motivation is about emotion. It lifts you, but it doesn't move you forward unless you know where to go and how to get there. Empowerment is different. Empowerment says, here's the energy, here's the direction, and here's the toolkit. It's not just about lighting a fire under someone. It's about giving them the matches, the wood, and the skill to keep it burning when you're not there. Motivation gets people excited. Empowerment gets people moving. I've been in rooms where speakers had the audience on their feet, screaming and high-fiving each other. 2 days later, those same people were back in the same rut, because nothing in their environment had changed. They had a temporary spark, but no structure to sustain it. That's like filling a bucket with water when the bucket has holes. It doesn't matter how much you pour, it's gone before you can use it. When you empower someone, You give them more than a feeling. You give them a framework. You show them exactly what to do next, and you make sure they have the authority and resources to do it. You remove excuses. You make it clear that the outcome is in their hands, not yours. That's uncomfortable for some, because when people are truly empowered, they can also fail. And failure for many leaders feels like a reflection of themselves. But here's the thing. If you're afraid of giving people power because you might be blamed if they fail, you're not leading, you're babysitting. True empowerment also means trusting people to make decisions without you standing over their shoulder. It means they don't need to text you for permission every time a choice comes up. It means they can see an opportunity or a problem and act on it because they understand the mission, the values, and the parameters. If they need you for every move, you haven't empowered them. You've just made them dependent. There's a story I often think about. Early in my career, I had a small team working on a project with a tight deadline. I was tempted to manage every detail, to control the process so nothing could go wrong. But I knew that if I did that, they'd never learn to think for themselves. So I laid out the goal, gave them the tools, and stepped back. I told them, if you get stuck, I'm here, but you own this. They didn't just deliver. They came back with solutions I would never have thought of. That's the beauty of empowerment. It multiplies the intelligence in the room. Empowerment also changes the way people see themselves. A motivated person feels good for a while. An empowered person starts to believe, I can do this on my own. That belief is powerful. It shifts how they approach problems, how they take risks, and how they recover from setbacks. They stop waiting for instructions and start creating their own path. And let's be honest, empowerment takes more effort than motivation. Motivation is easy. You can say the right things, tell the right story, raise your voice at the right moments, and you've got the room buzzing. But empowerment requires you to transfer skill, to build confidence, to change the way someone thinks. It's harder, but it's also the only thing that lasts. People sometimes ask me, how do I know if I've truly empowered my team? The answer is simple. Leave, go on holiday, turn off your phone and see what happens. If things fall apart, you didn't empower them. You just managed them. If things run smoothly, if they solve problems, if they make decisions that align with your vision without you holding their hand, then you've succeeded. Empowerment isn't about making people feel good. It's about making them capable. It's about replacing dependency with ownership. It's about turning spectators into players and players into leaders. And when you get it right, you create something rare. A team that doesn't just work for you, but a team that can work without you. That's the goal. Not to be the constant source of energy, but to be the source of capability. Because when the applause fades, when the room empties, when the music stops, the question isn't, how motivated are they? The question is, can they still win without me in the room? 7 rules, not 70, because greatness isn't a labyrinth. It's a lean, fierce sprint. You've got the scars, the stories, the smarts. Now go prioritize, act, adapt. In this world of noise, mastery lies in simplicity. 7 rules. Own them, build with them, change everything. Let's get to work.